circle, which is always useful for a GC. I'm Martin Tiedemann. I'm sorry I've still got a damp forehead from cycling over from Brixton, which is where I live. I was a councillor down in Croydon, and so I've kind of come up here, and Joan very kindly helped us in the general election in Croydon Central last year, and so it's good connections in South London. Now I live in Lambeth, which is one of the cooperative councils that we're launching tomorrow with Ed Miliband up in Rochdale. So I'll speak a bit more about the South London heartland of cooperation. I hope we can come out today with some ideas for Lewisham to add to that as well. The Co-Operative Party has been around for over 90 years. And it was formed, the Co-op movement decided not to plunge into the Labour Party when it was formed. It decided to sit on the sidelines. They'd got on vaguely well with the Liberal Party in the same way that perhaps other parts of the Labour movement had been a bit more restrained about whether to add themselves to the Labour ranks, had waited to see what might happen with the Labour Party and with the Liberals after the formation of the Labour Party. But the First World War changed everything. The First World War meant that the coalition, Liberal-led Conservative coalition, clamped down on cooperatives, sent cooperative factory workers to the front line, whilst the PLC factories, or their equivalents in those days, were spared from conscription. Cooperatives felt undermined, cooperatives felt discriminated against by a coalition government, and they decided that what they needed to do was form their own party. And that party, the Co-Operative Party, the first General Secretary was the president of the Stockport Cooperative Society, moved down to London. His name was Sam Perry. He brought his young son, Fred, down with him to live on the Brentham estate in Ealing, which was a cooperative estate. Had some excellent sporting facilities, some good tennis courts, and young Fred Perry learnt his tennis down there and went on to bigger and better things. His dad became one of the first cooperative MPs. Within a year of the founding of the Co-op Party, it had its first MP. And that MP had unilaterally taken the decision to take the Labour whip in Parliament, and ever since then, all Co-op MPs have. In 1927, they entered into a formal agreement, and so we now stand as Labour and Cooperative members of Parliament and so on. And we have 29 Labour and Cooperative members of Parliament today, 15 members of the House of Lords who are Labour and Cooperative, so 44 in total, which is the largest we've ever had. And that was really boosted by 97 when there'd been a cap historically on the numbers that the Co-op movement could have. We've got and 97 obviously saw lots of Labour MPs come in as well. So it was a good year for us, and we went up to 30 was our high point, and we're still at 29 MPs, and that's obviously fantastic. Some of them will be really familiar MPs. All of them are obviously excellent MPs, but you've got Ed Balls and Meg Hillier in the Shadow Cabinet. You've got some great new MPs who've come in, many of them front benchers already, like Luciana Berger and Johnny Reynolds, who's a whip, Gavin Shuker. And you've got some select committee chairs, Ian Davidson, Louise Ullman, and Adrian Bailey of the Biz Select Committee. So you've got a good range there of members of Parliament. And of course, we've got members of the Welsh Assembly, the Scottish Parliament, and councillors up and down the country, including many in this part of London. Greenwich has always been really strong because of the old Royal Arsenal connection, going back many years. There's always been a very strong connection with Greenwich, and other parts of London too, Merton and Croydon. When you join the Labour Party in Croydon, you kind of march to the Co-op to join the Co-op Party as well. It's kind of part of the deal. And we for a long time had one of the largest groups of Labour and cooperative councillors in the country. One of the things that had happened is, like the Co-op shops, the Co-op Party had maybe become a little bit stale, had become wedded to something that was seen as traditional, maybe a little bit embarrassing to parts of the Labour Party. I think over the last 15 years, as Labour's been in government and since, we've transformed ourselves, just as the Labour Party did, in terms of adapting our values, showcasing our values for modern context, and not being wedded to necessarily traditional structures and to just the traditional things that we've been fighting for. So that period in government saw, after the Tories had introduced legislation which saw many building societies demutualise, Labour brought in laws that, with private members' bills often led by our own MPs, cooperative MPs, which controlled and regulated the demutualisation, further demutualisation, prevented carpetbaggers. Carpetbaggers even tried to take down the Co-op itself. and there are now strict regulations that effectively prevents it, or if these building societies do continue to demutualise, which is I think unlikely, there would be such disbenefits and very little money to be made anymore from demutualising that kind of £500 cheque that I got from the Woolwich and the Halifax and my mum and dad got or whatever. Those days are effectively over. And that's thanks to laws that the Labour government brought in. Many other kind of technical regulations that Labour did introduce in power, but that are really helpful because the business regulations, company regulations, accountancy regulations often discriminate against co-ops. And they're kind of hard organisations to run sometimes. And when one co-op goes down, when one building society goes down, it often brings bad news for the whole sector. Unlike when one PLC, when Allied Carpets goes down, people don't say, well, the entire retail PLC model is a failure. But when one co-op or one building society fails, that's often the kind of the headline message in the business pages. So it's been a struggle over a long period, but I think we've seen a resurgence. The Co-op Group is the fifth biggest retailer. It took over Summerfield. There's quite a lot around here. It's taken over Britannia, and looks like the Co-op's trying to buy lots of the Lloyds branches as well. So you'll start to see, Lewisham's lucky you've got a Co-op Bank branch in the centre already, but you'll start seeing them across South London. And the Co-op brand is popular again. And it's also popular in politics, and it's popular with our enemies too, as a brand. So the big society, and underlying that, plenty of co-op and mutual speak is underpinning the big society, the Conservatives model, their idea of localism and free schools and public sector mutuals. This is a threat to us, and it's a threat to our model, to our values, because the Conservatives, that they're using our language, that they haven't adopted our values. That if you look at the models that they're bringing in, many of them are really speak for privatisation, and that wasn't our model. Cooperatives was always another form of public ownership, and right in the 1945 Parliament there were debates between Labour and cooperative MPs who wanted to see different models about public ownership, and in the 45 government did introduce cooperatives, but it also rejected some too, and it was an ongoing debate. The Conservative model is if you look at what Landseer said in health, for instance, he suggested that any organisation that works in health is a social enterprise by definition. Therefore, if United Healthcare comes here from the United States, they're here already, they are by definition, if they are working in the NHS, a social enterprise. And therefore, when they say that they're opening up the NHS to social enterprises, well, they mean anything. Circle Healthcare, which took over a hospital in Huntingdon, a contract that we initiated under the Labour government, a process. But Circle Healthcare is seen as a leading example of worker cooperatives. Well, Circle Healthcare is run by privateers, by fat cats, by people who, carpetbaggers who, it's their clear intention that once they've got the contracts, they say it very publicly, they're not ashamed of it, that they want to sell up and move on to another form of business. These aren't committed health professionals that want to do their best for the NHS. They're people who want to make a buck, and they're presented as the examples of what the cooperative movement's about. In international development, they said that they want to open up to, why should it just be UK-based charities who do this that are so huge and such almost like private organisations, but then they're allowing businesses to bid for those contracts to open it up as well. That they're blurring the lines between charities, social enterprises, they're undermining traditional charities, they are using language of, for instance, cooperatives on free schools, which that we have our own models of schools, cooperative trust schools. Ed Balls introduced a unit in the DCSF. They abolished the DCSF, they abolished the unit, they took away the money. We were on course for 200 cooperative trust schools. Now, obviously, academies are what the government's pushing. It's very difficult for schools to resist that push, for the head teachers in particular. They're not, and free schools aren't an equivalent. Free schools, our model was about taking existing schools and involving everyone who was already a partner in those schools, including the wider community, in the governance structure.